You live in a small village in 16th century Germany. You're a widow. You know herbs and you speak your mind. One morning, your neighbor's cow dies mysteriously or stops producing milk. By sunset, you're chained in a cold cell, accused of dancing with the devil. Tomorrow, the Inquisitor will arrive, armed not with just questions, but with a book. Merry meet, seekers of shadow and history. This is Sapphire, your occultorium historian, and today we're going to explore the Book of Witches, the Hammer of Witches, the Malleus Maleficarum. This book was not just any ordinary book. It was a weapon. Written in 1487 by Dominican Inquisitor Heinrich Kramer, a man with an axe to grind. It transformed superstition into a systematic campaign of fear. Kramer had a very wounded ego. Before writing the Malleus, Kramer's reputation was already pretty tarnished. In 1485, he had attempted to prosecute a group of women in Innsbruck for witchcraft. His obsession with sexualized questioning during interrogations scandalized local authorities. The bishop, even overseeing the case, had dismissed him, declaring his behavior as unethical and superstitious. Humiliated, Kramer left determined to vindicate himself. His solution? Write a book that would silence his critics and arm inquisitors with a text so persuasive it could not be ignored. To give his work weight, Kramer included Pope Innocent VIII's Summus Deserantis Affectibus. This decree merely permitted inquisitors to prosecute witchcraft in certain areas. It did not endorse Kramer's ideas, though. But by attaching it to his manuscript, Kramer created the illusion that the Pope himself had blessed this work. This was a bold forgery of authority, and it worked. The book spread across Europe, almost like a virus, printed and reprinted for 2 centuries, even racking a status of being in the top 5 publications. The Malleus did not emerge within a vacuum, though. Europe in the late 15th century was a cauldron of fear, excuse the pun. Plagues had wiped out millions of people, wars between kingdoms and religious factions tore communities apart, famine and economic hardship fueled resentment and suspicion. This fear needed a target, and witches became the perfect scapegoat. They were visible enough to accuse, and invisible enough to invent. And thanks to Gutenberg's press, Kramer's book traveled faster than any previous manual on witchcraft. Each copy replicated his paranoia, embedded it into the legal systems across Europe as well. The Malleus is divided into 3 key parts, each a little more chilling than the last, and each also substantial. In the first, he drafted and defined the enemy. He began to establish what witches were, that they were dangerous, and most importantly, that they were women. Within it, he wrote, quote, "All witchcraft comes from carnal lust, which is in women insatiably." According to Kramer, women were weaker of intellect and unstable emotionally, which made them easy prey for demonic influence. Within Deborah Merskin's 2007 article, she recalled that, quote, "It was gendered pseudoscience," unquote, which is a mix of theology and prejudice masquerading as fact. Art historian Jane Schuler in 1987 noted how contemporary art like Hans Baldwin's Witch's Sabbath reflected these ideas, portraying women as nude and seductive, and most of all, dangerous, creating a visual propaganda which reinforced Kramer's work. Within the second part, it's more of the hunting of the witch. The second section is definitely more of a manual of suspicion. It denotes certain attributes to look for within a witch, such as birthmarks, moles, and scars. These all could be signs of a witch's teat for her to nurse her demon with. Unexplained illnesses within livestock or children or large parts of the community also became proof of the Maleficarum. Most horrifyingly, Kramer legitimized torture as a primary way to obtain confessions of witches. Victims were often tortured until they said whatever their interrogators wanted to hear, which we know now in our modern era is a terrible way to go about getting a confession from someone. Folklorist Maura Smith in 2002 noted that some accusations were grotesquely absurd, like the infamous claim that witches could steal men's genitals and hide them in birds' nests. If you don't believe me, look it up in the Malleus Maleficarum. It is an insane topic that is covered multiple times within the book, and probably one of my favorites. The final part of this book outlines the legal procedures that should have taken place. Witnesses were encouraged to lie for the greater good. Always a great recommendation, right? No, I'm kidding. Accused witches were denied a defense, and execution, often by burning, was framed as an act of purification. It wasn't justice, it was ritualized murder, disguised as righteousness, in the name of God. Now, before we leave off of this topic, we do need to cover the extensive misogyny at the core of the Malleus Maleficarum. At its heart, the Malleus is less about witchcraft, and it is more about controlling women. Not to sound like a feminist here, but that is exactly what this book is about. There is extensive research about this topic. Historian Richard Horsley in 1979 found that the accused witches were often widows without male protection, midwives or healers with herbal knowledge, and women who were outspoken or economically independent. The accusations of witches during this time period was more about controlling your community than trying to find religious outcasts. These women were threatening to patriarchy and the structure, simply just by existing outside of its control. By framing witchcraft as inherently female crime, the Malleus justified systemic violence. In many areas, up to 80% of those executed for witchcraft were women. The Malleus became a blueprint for witch trials across Europe. Germany saw massive hunts, including the Tyr trials of 1581 to 1593, where hundreds were burned. Scotland executed thousands under King James VI, who himself wrote the Demonology, who of which we will get into at a later date. He is one of my favorite witch hunters to research and talk about, as he himself thought witches were personally after him. Even in colonial America, its shadow loomed. We all know about the Salem witch trials of 1692, and it drew on the heavy belief system rooted in texts like the Malleus, where women's bodies were seen as gateways to evil. By the 18th century, the Enlightenment began dismantling the superstitions that gave the Malleus power. Rationalism and skepticism took over that fear of the unknown. Witch trials faded. Yet the damage was irreversible, Tens of thousands were executed by this point, entire communities had been scarred, and centuries of misogynistic thought was left behind. Today, scholars view the Malleus as both a historical artifact and a warning. As Diego Muzio in 2007 wrote, it is a, quote, text of shadows, a reminder of how easily fear can be turned into violence when cloaked in authority. There are still witch laws in effect throughout not just America, but England and Europe and parts of Asia today. Modern witch hunts literally and metaphorically still happen. The same mechanisms of fear and control persist to this day. Now, the Malleus Maleficarum was more than a book, as we've covered today. It was a hammer, and it struck countless innocent lives. As we close this chapter, remember, history's darkest pages teach us the brightest lessons. Question authority, resist fear, and above all, refuse to let superstition and hatred dictate justice. Thank you all for walking with me in the shadows of the archives. And this was a deep dive to intrigue you, and don't forget to like and subscribe. I would love to hear your thoughts below on how you feel the Malleus Maleficarum has affected today's history. Until next time, stay curious,